My family kicked me out when my sister got rich and then came back begging for help. My parents have this framed photo in their living room. It's from my sister's birthday party about 5 years ago, the one where she announced she was opening her own clothing store. In the picture, everyone's smiling. My mom's got her arm around her like she just won the lottery. And my dad's giving her this look of pure pride that I've spent my entire life trying to earn and never quite managed. I'm in the background, slightly out of focus, holding a plate of cake I never ate because nobody noticed I disappeared to get it. That photo pretty much sums up the last 8 years of my life. And honestly, probably the 32 years before that too. I'm an accountant. Have been since I graduated at 24. Stable job at a mid-sized firm, decent salary, nothing glamorous, but nothing to be ashamed of either. The kind of career that doesn't make headlines but pays the bills consistently. I've never been late on a deadline, never had a complaint from a client, never missed a day of work unless I was literally too sick to stand. My performance reviews are always positive, always the same, reliable, dependable, consistent. Those are the words they use to describe me, and I used to think they were compliments until I realized they're really just polite ways of saying boring. And for the past 8 years, I've been paying a lot more bills than just my own. It started when my parents retired. Dad's pension from his factory job wasn't great, and Mom never worked enough years outside the home to qualify for much of anything. They sat me down one evening in their living room, all serious faces and heavy sighs, and explained that they were struggling. The rent was too high on their apartment. Utilities kept going up every year. Medical expenses were piling up because Dad needed blood pressure medication, and Mom had just been diagnosed with early arthritis. Could I help out? Just temporarily, of course. Just until they figured things out, got their finances sorted, maybe found a smaller place or qualified for some assistance program. I was 24 and still believed that family meant something unconditional. Still believed that the people who raised you were owed whatever you could give them in return. So I said yes without even asking how much they needed or for how long. I just said yes, because that's what good daughters do, and I desperately wanted to be a good daughter. That temporary arrangement turned into 8 years of me handing over more than half my monthly salary. Every single month, like clockwork, I would transfer money to their accounts or pay their bills directly. Rent payment of $1,400 to their landlord, sent automatically on the 25th so it would clear before the 1st. Utility payments to 3 different companies, averaging about $200 depending on the season. A recurring transfer of $500 to their checking account for groceries, medications, and whatever else they needed. The occasional emergency that somehow always coincided with my sister needing something for her business. A new display rack, a computer upgrade, inventory for the upcoming season. These emergencies were never technically for her, always framed as family necessities. But the money always seemed to flow in her direction one way or another. I lived in a tiny studio apartment on the wrong side of town while they stayed in a 2-bedroom place in a nicer neighborhood with a doorman and a view of the park. I drove a car that was older than some of my coworkers, a sedan with 200,000 miles and a persistent check engine light I couldn't afford to investigate, while my sister posted pictures of her new vehicle on social media, thanking our parents for helping her with the down payment. I hadn't taken a real vacation in years because every time I started saving for one, there'd be another call, another crisis, another favor that wasn't really a favor because saying no was never actually an option. And through all of it, through every sacrifice and every month of watching my own life stay frozen in place while I funded theirs, I was never the good daughter. That title belonged exclusively to my sister. My sister, the entrepreneur. My sister, the visionary. My sister, who was going to be somebody while I was just going to be an accountant forever. She opened a clothing store 5 years ago in a trendy part of downtown, targeting young professionals with more money than fashion sense. The startup costs were astronomical. Loans and equipment and inventory and deposits. And a significant portion of it came from money she borrowed from our parents. Money that came from my monthly contributions, though nobody ever acknowledged that little detail. The math wasn't complicated. I gave my parents over $2,000 a month. They gave my sister $15,000 for her business. And somehow, I was the selfish one when I mentioned maybe taking a weekend off. Her store was always about to take off. Always on the verge of major success. Always just one good season away from being profitable. The fact that it never quite got there wasn't her fault, according to my parents. The economy was bad. The location needed time to build foot traffic. Competition from online retailers was unfair. The building owner was difficult. The suppliers were unreliable. There was always an excuse, always a reason why her perpetual almost success was more impressive than my actual, consistent, boring stability. I can't count how many family dinners I sat through where my father would spend 45 minutes talking about my sister's business plans, analyzing her strategies, offering advice about marketing and customer retention and expansion possibilities, while barely asking me how work was going. A perfunctory question about whether things were busy at the office, followed immediately by a transition back to the real conversation. My mother would show me pictures of the store on her phone, zooming in on displays my sister had designed, asking why I couldn't be more creative like her, why I didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit, why I was content to just work for someone else my whole life. Meanwhile, I was the one keeping their lights on. I was the one making sure they didn't get evicted. I was the one who stayed up late calculating exactly how much I could afford to give them while still covering my own rent and utilities and the minimum payments on my student loans. But somehow that translated to nothing in their eyes. Somehow my contribution was invisible, expected, taken for granted like oxygen or gravity. The comparison was constant. My sister was ambitious. I was just comfortable. My sister took risks. I played it safe. My sister was building something. I was just existing. Never mind that her ambition was funded by everyone around her while my existence kept the whole family afloat. Those details got conveniently lost in the narrative they'd constructed. I told myself it would change. I told myself that eventually they'd see. That one day, my father would look at me the way he looked at my sister. That my mother would brag about me to her friends instead of always steering conversations toward the store. I thought sacrifice earned recognition, that love worked like an accounting ledger where eventually the balance would even out. I was wrong. I was so incredibly, painfully wrong. The realization didn't come gradually, creeping up on me over months or years. It hit me all at once on a Tuesday evening in March, standing in my parents' living room with an envelope full of cash in my hand and my father's contempt ringing in my ears. I'd gone there like I always did, first week of the month, to drop off the money. This particular month I'd brought cash instead of doing a transfer because their checking account had been acting up. Something about a fraud alert that froze their card, and they needed the rent money immediately. So I'd stopped at an ATM, withdrawn $1,500, and driven across town to deliver it in person. 8 years of this routine, 8 years of showing up, handing over the envelope, getting a brief thank you that always somehow felt like an acknowledgement of a debt rather than gratitude for a gift. But it was fine. It was what family did. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The mantra I repeated every time I watched my bank account drain to keep theirs full. That Tuesday started normally enough. I got off work at 5:30, hit the ATM, sat in traffic for 45 minutes, finally pulled up to their building around 7. I knocked on their door. My mom let me in with her usual distracted greeting. I walked into the living room where my dad was watching some game show on television. The apartment smelled like the pot roast my mom used to make when I was a kid, and for a moment I felt something like warmth, like maybe this visit would be different somehow. I pulled out the envelope and set it on the coffee table like I always did. $1,500 in crisp 20s and 50s, enough to cover their rent with a little left over for whatever else they needed. My father looked at it. Then he looked at me, and something in his expression shifted, hardened, became something I didn't recognize. And then he picked up the envelope and threw it on the floor. Not dropped. Threw. With force, with intention, with a violence that shocked me into absolute stillness. The envelope hit the ground, and some of the bills scattered across the carpet, 20s fanning out like fallen leaves, and I just stood there too stunned to move, trying to process what had just happened. "We don't need your charity anymore," he said. His voice was cold, dismissive, dripping with contempt I'd never heard directed at me before. He was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd offended him, like I was something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Your sister is going to take care of us now, like a real daughter should." I blinked. My brain couldn't form the words to respond. "What?" "The store is doing well," my mother chimed in from the doorway, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before, a kind of triumphant satisfaction that made my stomach turn. She was smiling, actually smiling, like this moment of rejecting me was something she'd been looking forward to. "She's finally making real money, not like your little salary, real money, entrepreneur money." My father stood up from his recliner, and suddenly he seemed taller than I remembered, more imposing, his shoulders squared like he was preparing for a confrontation he'd already won. 8 years you've been giving us scraps, crumbs, making us feel like we owed you something every time you walked through that door with your little envelope. Your sister, she's going to actually take care of us properly, set us up in a better place, give us the retirement we deserve instead of this constant handout from someone who clearly resents every dollar. Scraps, crumbs. More than half my salary for 8 years, and she was calling it scraps. More than $100,000 over the course of nearly a decade, money that could have been my down payment on a house, my retirement savings, my life, and she was standing there calling it crumbs like I'd been tossing them pennies. "I've been paying your rent," I said, And my voice came out wrong, too quiet, too shaky. Nothing like the confident rebuttal I needed in that moment. Your utilities, your groceries, everything, for 8 years, I've been paying for everything. And you think that makes you special? My father actually laughed, a harsh barking sound that felt like a slap. You think that entitles you to something? You did the bare minimum that any daughter would do, any decent daughter would do. But your sister, she's going to give us a real life, not this constant subsistence, this paycheck-to-paycheck survival you've been generous enough to provide. She's going to give us what we actually deserve. I looked at my mother, desperately seeking some anchor, some sign that she didn't agree with what was happening, waiting for her to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge even a fraction of what I'd done for them over the years. She just nodded, her eyes avoiding mine, her head bobbing in agreement with every word coming out of my father's mouth, validating the rejection, endorsing the dismissal, choosing, in that moment, exactly the same way she'd been choosing for years. Your money was always dirty anyway, my father continued, and I could hear the venom in his voice. Years of some resentment I'd never even known existed. Given grudgingly, like you were doing us some huge favor instead of just being a daughter. Every time you walked in here with that envelope, I could see it in your face. The martyr complex. The silent judgment. Like we should be grateful you were keeping us alive. Your sister gives from the heart. You give from obligation, and you make sure we know it. Dirty. She called the money I'd sacrificed everything for dirty. The money I'd earned working overtime, skipping lunches, wearing worn-out clothes so I could keep sending them everything they needed. That money was dirty because I hadn't given it with enough enthusiasm, hadn't smiled wide enough while watching my own dreams disappear into their accounts. I don't remember deciding to bend down. I just found myself on my knees on their carpet, gathering the scattered bills with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, stuffing them back into the envelope one by one while my parents watched from above. Neither of them moved to help. Neither of them said a word. They just watched me grovel on their floor, picking up the money they'd thrown away, and their silence was louder than anything they could have said. When I stood up, envelope clutched in my fist, I looked at them both, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years, and I saw strangers. Strangers who wore the faces of the people who raised me, but who had somehow become something I didn't recognize. Or maybe they'd always been this, and I'd just been too desperate for their love to see it. Okay, I said. Just that one word. Okay. I turned around and walked out of their apartment. I heard my mother say something behind me, maybe calling my name, maybe not, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking until I reached my car, got in, closed the door, and sat there in the parking garage staring at nothing until the overhead lights turned off automatically and left me in darkness. The drive home is a blur. I remember stopping at a red light and realizing I couldn't remember the last 3 miles, couldn't recall which streets I'd taken or whether I'd even stopped at the signs. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel so badly I had to pull over twice. I remember walking into my apartment and standing in the middle of the room for what felt like hours, still holding that envelope with its crumpled bills, and my father's contempt clinging to it like a curse. I remember finally sitting down on my bed and staring at the wall until the sun came up, watching the shadows shift and stretch and disappear, while my mind replayed that scene over and over like a video I couldn't stop. The shock lasted about 3 days. 3 days of going through the motions at work, entering numbers into spreadsheets without seeing them, attending meetings without hearing a word anyone said. 3 days of eating food I couldn't taste, of lying awake at night replaying the scene, of hearing my father's voice calling my sacrifice scraps. That word echoing in my head like a curse I couldn't shake, like an accusation that had burrowed under my skin and taken root there. And then, on the 4th day, something shifted. I was sitting at my desk in my cubicle, staring at my computer screen without seeing the spreadsheet in front of me, when I suddenly pulled up my banking app, not really thinking about why, just moving on autopilot, my fingers finding the familiar path to my accounts. There they were, the automatic transfers I'd set up years ago when my parents first asked for help. All of it scheduled, all of it automatic, all of it bleeding me dry month after month while they took it for granted. I canceled them, all of them, one by one, clicking through the confirmation screens. I watched the scheduled transfers disappear from my account. The rent payment, gone. The utility payments, gone. The grocery money, gone. With each deletion, something loosened in my chest. Some knot that had been there so long I'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. It felt like taking a first breath after being underwater for 8 years. That night, I sat down with a calculator and actually looked at my finances. Really looked. For the first time since I'd started supporting my parents. The numbers were almost absurd. like a punchline to a joke I'd been living without realizing. Without those transfers, I had more than enough to live comfortably, more than enough to save, more than enough to actually have a life instead of just existing between paydays, watching every dollar flow out of my account into theirs. I did the math 3 times because I couldn't believe it. Almost $2,200 a month that would now stay in my account. $26,000 a year that I'd been giving away while living in a studio apartment and driving a car that was slowly dying. I went online and booked a flight to somewhere warm for the following weekend. A beach resort in a tropical location, just 3 days. Nothing extravagant by normal standards, but the first real vacation I'd taken in years. When I hit the confirm button and saw the booking confirmation appear on my screen, I actually laughed out loud. A real laugh, surprised out of me by the sheer novelty of spending money on myself without calculating whether I could still cover someone else's bills. It felt foreign, that sound coming from my throat. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. That trip changed something fundamental in me. I remember sitting on the beach the first morning, watching the sun rise over the water, and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd watched a sunrise without immediately thinking about what bills were due that day. The waves came in and went out, and I just sat there, feet in the sand, breathing salt air, feeling like a person instead of an ATM machine with anxiety. I ate food I'd never tried before, slept in until whenever I woke up naturally. No alarm, no obligations. Read a novel cover to cover in 2 days. Something I hadn't done since college. I talked to strangers at the hotel bar, made casual conversation about nothing important, laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny but felt good anyway. On my last night there, I sat on my balcony overlooking the ocean and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization of how much I'd been missing, how much life I'd been denying myself in service of people who never even noticed the sacrifice. When I got back home, everything looked different. The same tiny apartment, the same worn furniture, the same view of the parking lot. But I saw it with new eyes now, eyes that understood this wasn't my life. It was just a holding pattern I'd been stuck in for 8 years. This was the consequence of choices I could now choose differently. The next month was like waking up from a coma. I bought new clothes, actual nice clothes from actual nice stores, replacing the worn-out shirts I'd been rotating for years, because they were technically still functional, even if they were faded and frayed. I upgraded my phone, finally retiring the cracked screen and sluggish processor I'd been ignoring, because repairs felt like luxuries I couldn't afford. I got my car fixed properly, replacing the parts that had been held together with hope and duct tape, and the mechanic actually seemed surprised when I told her to just fix everything that needed fixing instead of asking for the bare minimum. I started eating better, cooking actual meals instead of surviving on ramen and frozen dinners. I went out to restaurants occasionally, sat at tables with real tablecloths, and ordered things without looking at the prices first. I treated myself to small things that I'd always denied myself. A nice bottle of wine, a book I actually wanted to read, tickets to a concert I'd been eyeing for months. Every purchase felt like an act of rebellion. Every dollar spent on myself a small declaration of independence. And the guilt I expected to feel, it never came. Or rather, it tried to come. Little whispers in the back of my mind about responsibility and family, and what kind of daughter abandons her parents when they need her. But every time those whispers started, I'd hear my father's voice calling my sacrifice scraps, dirty money given grudgingly, and the guilt would evaporate like it had never existed. Hard to feel guilty about stopping something that was never appreciated in the first place. I didn't hear from my parents during this time. Part of me had expected frantic calls within days, maybe some attempt at reconciliation or at least explanation for what had happened. I'd half prepared myself for apologies or accusations or demands to know why the rent hadn't been paid. But there was nothing. Silence. Complete and total radio silence for weeks. They'd gotten what they wanted, my sister's promise of support, and I'd been discarded like a tool that had outlived its usefulness. It should have hurt more than it did, that silence. Instead, it felt like confirmation that I'd made the right choice. They didn't miss me. They missed my money, and when they thought they had a replacement source, they couldn't get rid of me fast enough. The absence of any attempt to repair things, to apologize, to acknowledge what had happened, told me everything I needed to know about where I actually stood with them, where I'd always stood, even when I was too desperate for their approval to see it. 2 months later, on a random Tuesday evening that started like any other, my phone rang at 11 at night. I'd been reading in bed, finally allowing myself the luxury of free time that wasn't spent worrying about bills or family obligations, when the buzz of an incoming call startled me. My mother's name on the screen, the first contact from any of them since that evening in March. I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the decline button for a long moment, wavering between the desire to hear what she had to say and the protective instinct to keep that door firmly closed. But something, curiosity maybe, or perhaps just the lingering remnants of the daughter I used to be, made me accept the call. You need to help us. No hello. No how are you. No acknowledgement that 2 months had passed without a word between us. Just immediate demand, and underneath it, something I'd never heard in my mother's voice before. Genuine panic. Raw desperation. Help you with what? The store. Her voice cracked on the words. It's gone. Your sister's store. It closed last month. She lost everything, the inventory, the lease, all the money she'd invested. We can't pay rent. The landlord is threatening eviction. We haven't paid in 2 months because we were waiting for your sister to figure it out. And now there's nothing left and we're going to be on the street. I sat there in my bed, phone pressed to my ear, processing this information with a strange sense of detachment. Last month? The store closed last month? She didn't want to tell anyone. She was embarrassed. She was trying to fix it, taking out loans, looking for investors, anything to keep it going, but there was nothing left. The debts were too high. The suppliers cut her off. She had to close and walk away with nothing. She was crying now. I could hear the tears in her voice, that particular thickness that comes from speaking through sobs. We'll pay you back. Every penny, I swear, I promise. We just need help right now, just to get through this rough patch, and then when things settle down, we'll make it up to you. Everything we owe you. Somewhere in the background, I could hear my father saying something, his voice muffled but urgent. My mother's hand must have covered the phone because the sound got distant, and then she was back, words tumbling over each other in her desperation. Your father and I, we know we said some things. That night, when you came over, we were just excited about your sister's success, and it came out wrong. We didn't mean any of it. You know we love you. You know we appreciate everything you've done for us over the years. We were just caught up in the moment, and it sounded worse than we meant it. But you're our daughter, our flesh and blood, and we need you. Please, please help us. I listened to her talk. Really listened to the words she was saying. Analyzed them the way I analyzed financial statements at work, looking for the truth hidden in the numbers. And what I heard wasn't an apology. Not really. It was an explanation that framed their cruelty as a misunderstanding, a contextual mistake, rather than a revelation of how they actually felt. She only mentioned my father's words as things that came out wrong rather than acknowledging them as revealing something that had always been true. She promised to pay me back, as if 8 years of one-way support could be balanced with some future hypothetical repayment that we both knew would never happen. She was calling me not because she'd realized she was wrong, not because she missed me, but because she needed something, because the alternative had failed and the backup plan was suddenly necessary again. No, I said. The word stopped her mid-sentence. A long pause, confusion replacing desperation. What? No, I'm not going to help. But we'll be homeless. The panic was back now, sharper than before, tinged with disbelief. Your father is 70 years old. I have health problems. You can't just let your own parents end up on the street. What kind of daughter would do that? You told me my money was dirty. Dad threw it on the ground and called it crumbs, called my 8 years of support scraps that any daughter would provide. You said my sister would take care of you properly, that what I gave wasn't good enough, that I was just going through the motions while she actually cared. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. So let her take care of you. That's what you wanted. That's what you chose. He can't. I told you, she has nothing. The business took everything she had. That sounds like her problem. And yours, not mine. My mother started crying harder. Or maybe she'd been crying the whole time and I just hadn't fully registered it through the phone. Please, I'm begging you, we're your parents. Whatever happened, whatever was said, you can't just abandon us like this. That's not how family works. That's not who you are. I'm not abandoning you. You already made it clear I wasn't part of the family equation, remember? I was just a source of dirty money given grudgingly, while my sister was the real daughter. Well, now that dirty money is staying with me. I paused, letting the words settle, remembering every comparison, every dismissal, every time I was made to feel like less than nothing, despite giving everything I had. I hope my sister figures something out for you. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could respond. Then, with a sense of finality that felt almost ceremonial, I blocked her number, and my father's number, and my sister's, and just in case she got any ideas about trying a different approach. That night, I slept better than I had in months, maybe years. The calls didn't stop just because I blocked the obvious numbers. Over the following weeks, my phone rang constantly from numbers I didn't recognize at all hours of the day and night. Unknown area codes. Calls that went to voicemail and left increasingly desperate messages. Sometimes my sister alternating between angry demands that I grow up and stop being petty and tearful, pleas for me to just listen. Texts from random numbers, clearly my parents using neighbors' phones or those prepaid ones you can buy at convenience stores. Each message some variation of please, and we're sorry, and you can't do this. They tried every angle. They tried guilt, reminding me of everything they'd done for me as a child, conveniently forgetting all the things they'd failed to do. They tried anger, accusing me of being heartless and vindictive and selfish. They tried bargaining, promising to change, to be better, to finally give me the recognition I deserved. They tried playing on sympathy, describing in detail how scared they were, how desperate, how alone. I ignored all of it. Every call declined, every message deleted without response, every attempt at contact met with the same unbreakable silence they'd given me when they thought they didn't need me anymore. Then they got creative. I got a message on social media from my father's account, all capital letters and exclamation points, ranting about ungrateful children and how he regretted raising me, how I'd turned out to be exactly the disappointment he'd always suspected I was. I blocked that account without responding. Another message appeared from a different account my mother had apparently created. A long rambling letter about family bonds and forgiveness and how we only get one family in this life. Blocked. My sister created a new profile just to tell me I was dead to her, which would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetically ironic, given that I was pretty sure I'd been dead to her for years. Blocked. Then they showed up at my office. I was in a meeting with a client, going over quarterly projections, when the receptionist knocked on the conference room door, looking distinctly uncomfortable. She pulled me aside and whispered that my family was in the lobby, that they were refusing to leave, and that they were starting to make a scene. I could hear raised voices from down the hall, my father's distinctive bellow demanding to see me. I excused myself from the meeting, walked down the corridor, and found all three of them standing in our reception area. My mother was crying, clutching tissues, her makeup running down her cheeks. My father looked furious, his face red, his hands clenched at his sides, and my sister just looked lost, standing slightly behind them, unable to meet my eyes. "You need to leave," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected, steadier than I felt. "We're not going anywhere until you talk to us," my father growled, and for a moment he was the same man who'd thrown my money on the ground, full of righteous anger he hadn't earned. "You're going to listen to what we have to say. You're going to stop acting like a spoiled child and face your family." "No, I'm not. This is my workplace. These are my colleagues and my clients. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have security escort you out, and then I'll file a harassment complaint. Your choice." My mother stepped forward, reaching for my arm. "How can you be so cold? We're your family. We raised you, fed you, gave you everything when you were growing up, and this is how you repay us?" I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You made it very clear what kind of family we are, or aren't. Now please leave. Don't make me ask again." Security did have to escort them out in the end. Two of the building guards, firm but professional, guiding them toward the elevator while my father shouted accusations and my mother sobbed, and my sister just walked in defeated silence. It was embarrassing. My coworkers definitely noticed, definitely whispered among themselves after I retreated back to my office. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work while my phone buzzed constantly, with blocked number notifications. My concentration shattered, my professional image tarnished. But I didn't break, I didn't cave, I didn't run after them with apologies and checkbooks. I just sat at my desk and did my job and let them face the consequences of their choices. A few weeks after the office incident, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's younger sister. She'd always been the family diplomat, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts and maintain peace at holiday gatherings. Growing up, she'd been the one I could talk to when my parents were being particularly difficult, always willing to listen without judgment. I hadn't blocked her number because she'd never been involved in any of this. Never taken sides. Never tried to manipulate me into anything. "I know you're angry," she said after we'd exchanged the initial hellos and how are yous. "And honestly, I understand why, but I thought you should know what's happening." "I'm not sure I want to know," I said, but I didn't hang up. "They were evicted last week. Your parents and your sister. They couldn't find anyone else to help them, couldn't get the money together in time. They're all living together now in a little apartment in a rough part of town. 1 bedroom, barely any space. Your father has to sleep on the couch because there's only room for 1 bed." I processed this information and waited for something to stir inside me. Guilt, maybe. Satisfaction. Anything. But there was nothing. No surge of vindication, no twinge of remorse, just a kind of distant acknowledgement that actions had consequences and these were the consequences of their actions. "I'm not going to ask you to help them," my aunt continued, and I appreciated that at least. What they did to you, how they treated you for all those years, I saw it. Everyone in the family saw it. Even if nobody wanted to say anything, the way they compared you to your sister, the way they took everything you gave without ever acknowledging it. It was wrong. We all knew it was wrong. Then why didn't anyone say anything? A long pause. Because it was easier not to. Because your parents are difficult people and nobody wanted to start a fight. Because we told ourselves it would get better eventually. She sighed. We were wrong too. Complicit in our own way. I'm sorry for that. Thank you for telling me what's happening. I do appreciate it. For what it's worth, I think your father is finally starting to realize how wrong he was. Your mother too. They talk about you constantly now. About how they wish things had been different. How they took you for granted. How they didn't see what they had until it was gone. They had 8 years to wish things were different. They chose not to. My aunt sighed again. I know. I'm not trying to defend them or convince you to forgive them. I just thought you'd want to know where things stand. And I hope that someday, maybe, there might be a path to healing. Family is important, even when it's broken beyond recognition, even when the people in it don't deserve second chances. I didn't respond to that. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, safe topics like the weather and her garden and whether the local team would make the playoffs, and then we hung up with promises to talk again soon. I went back to my life, to my freedom, to the strange new reality where I was no longer funding a family that didn't want me until they did. Months passed. The hot days of summer mellowed into the cool afternoons of fall. Leaves changed colors outside my office window, fell from trees, covered the sidewalks in amber and gold. I took another vacation, a real one this time, a whole week at a beach resort where I could actually relax without constantly calculating how much I was spending versus how much I needed to send home. I lay on warm sand and listened to waves crash and felt something loosen in me that I hadn't even known was tight. I started putting money into savings, real savings, not the emergency fund that had always been rated for someone else's emergency. I opened an investment account and started learning about index funds and retirement planning, the kind of financial future building I'd helped clients with for years but never applied to my own life. I started looking at houses, just browsing listings online at first, then actually scheduling viewings, imagining what it might be like to own something instead of renting a tiny box on the wrong side of town. My aunt called occasionally with updates, never pushed, never tried to convince me of anything, just offered information I could take or leave. My father had gotten a job as a night security guard at some office building downtown, his first real employment in years. He worked from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, sitting at a desk in an empty lobby, making barely above minimum wage for his vigilance. The man who used to lecture me about ambition and entrepreneurship, who looked down on my stable accounting job as something beneath the family name, was now grateful for the opportunity to watch cameras in an empty building while the rest of the city slept. My mother had started cleaning houses for extra money, taking the bus to wealthy neighborhoods to scrub other people's toilets and wash other people's dishes. She'd never worked outside the home during my childhood, had always presented herself as above such things. A woman whose place was managing the household while her husband provided. Now she was on her hands and knees in strangers' bathrooms, earning in a week what I used to send them in a day. And my sister, the entrepreneur, the golden child, the visionary whose business was going to change everything, was working retail at a clothing store in the mall. Not her clothing store. Someone else's clothing store, standing behind a register, folding shirts and arranging displays and earning hourly wages, plus whatever commission she could scrape together, just like any other sales associate. She'd gone from being the boss to being bossed around, from having her own office to having a locker in the break room, from dreaming about expansion to hoping for a promotion to assistant manager. There was a certain irony in that, I suppose. The businesswoman reduced to minimum wage at exactly the kind of establishment she used to dream of owning. The woman whose vision was supposedly worth more than my stability, now grateful for a job that came with a name tag and a required dress code. But I found I couldn't even take satisfaction in it. It just felt sad and small and pointless, like the punchline of a joke that nobody was laughing at because it wasn't actually funny. I didn't hate them anymore. That surprised me, actually. The anger had been so intense in those first months after the break, so consuming and righteous, that I'd assumed it would last forever, that I'd go to my grave holding on to that fury. But it faded, slowly, imperceptibly, replaced by something that felt almost like indifference. They existed somewhere out there, living their reduced circumstances, dealing with the consequences of their choices. And I existed here, finally building a life that was actually mine. Those two realities didn't need to intersect anymore. The 6-month mark after the break hit in late September, and I was sitting on my new balcony, in my new apartment in a better neighborhood, drinking a beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And I realized something that stopped me mid-sip. I was happy. Actually, genuinely deeply happy, maybe for the first time in my adult life. Not the manufactured contentment I'd convinced myself I felt while sacrificing everything for people who didn't appreciate it. Not the resignation that passed for peace when you've given up on your own dreams to fund someone else's. Real happiness. The kind that comes from living for yourself, from building something that's yours, from finally being the main character in your own story instead of a supporting player in someone else's. I'd started seeing someone. A guy I met through a friend of a friend at a dinner party. The kind of social event I'd never had time or money for during the years of family obligation. Nothing serious yet. Just a few dates, dinners, and movies, and long walks through the park. But enough to remember that there was more to life than work and sacrifice. Enough to remember that I was 32 years old and deserved to have a romantic life, a social life, a life outside the accounting office and my tiny apartment. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd let drift away during the years of being broke and exhausted, people I'd known in college who'd gradually stopped inviting me to things because I always said no, always had some excuse about needing to work or not having enough money. They welcomed me back without judgment, without questions about where I'd been or why I'd disappeared, just happy to have me around again. We went to bars and restaurants and sporting events, did all the normal things that normal people do, and every time I laughed at a joke or split a check or just sat there enjoying the company of people who actually wanted me around, I felt another piece of my old self coming back to life. One friend, someone I'd been close to back in college, told me she'd always wondered what happened to me after graduation, how I'd started out so full of plans and gradually just faded, became someone who couldn't make it to birthday parties, couldn't join weekend trips, couldn't even grab a drink after work because there was always something more pressing. She said it was like watching someone drown in slow motion, and she hadn't known how to help because I never seemed to want help, just kept insisting I was fine. Everything was fine. I just had family obligations. That wasn't living, she told me over beers one night. That was serving a life sentence for a crime you didn't commit. She wasn't wrong. I'd picked up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. Reading, actual books that weren't about tax codes. Cooking, experimenting with recipes that took more than 10 minutes. I'd started going to the gym, taking care of my health instead of just surviving from day to day. I'd discovered that there were hours in the evening and weekends that could be spent on things I actually enjoyed. Hours that didn't have to be devoted to worry and sacrifice and guilt. And the money. God, the money. It wasn't even that I was earning more. I was earning the same salary I'd always earned, the same reliable paycheck from the same reliable job. But keeping it, actually keeping it and watching it grow, made such an enormous difference that it felt like a completely different life. I'd paid off my old car and bought a new one. Nothing extravagant, but reliable and comfortable and mine. I was building savings that would actually stay saved. I'd moved from that tiny studio to a proper one-bedroom with a balcony and a view and space to breathe. Every month I looked at my bank account and felt something like wonder at the numbers there. Numbers that used to disappear into the void of someone else's life. Was I being cruel? The question still occurred to me sometimes, usually late at night, when self-doubt tends to creep in, and the quiet makes space for second-guessing. My parents were old. They were struggling. They were family, whatever that word meant anymore. A different person might have forgiven. A better person, maybe. One with less pride and more grace. Someone might have helped despite everything, put blood ties above personal grievances, accepted that parents are human and make mistakes and deserve second chances. But then I'd remember that feeling of being on my knees on their carpet, gathering scattered bills while my parents watched without moving, without helping, without a flicker of shame on their faces. I'd remember 8 years of being invisible, of being the wrong daughter, of pouring myself empty for people who couldn't even see me clearly enough to appreciate what I was giving. I'd remember that what they wanted now wasn't actually me. They wanted my money. They wanted the function I served, not the person I was. And when they thought they'd found a replacement for that function, they'd thrown me away without a second thought. The self-doubt would fade then, replaced by something that felt a lot like peace. Summer had long since given way to autumn when my phone rang one evening with an unknown number. I'd stopped automatically declining those calls, having changed my number months ago to escape the harassment. Most unknown calls now were just spam, robotic voices offering extended warranties or threatening IRS audits. I answered out of habit, ready to hang up. Please don't hang up. My sister's voice. Not angry this time, not demanding or accusing or self-righteous, just tired and small and oddly young-sounding, like she'd regressed to the kid I remembered from decades ago, the little sister who used to follow me around and ask me to play together. I have nothing to say to you. I said. But I didn't hang up. I know you don't. And you have every right to end this call right now. Please, just listen for a minute. 1 minute. You can hang up after, block this number, never hear from me again. But please just listen first. I didn't hang up. I'm still not sure why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe some stubborn remnant of the bond we used to have before money and favoritism poisoned everything. Maybe I just needed to hear what she could possibly say that would matter. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked on the words, raw and broken. I'm so sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. For how I let Mom and Dad treat you. For years and years of just taking you for granted. Letting them compare us. Letting them make you feel like you weren't enough when you were the only one actually holding anything together. I didn't respond. Just listened. Phone pressed to my ear. Watching the last light fade from the sky outside my window. I was so stupid. So blind. So caught up in my own story that I couldn't see what was happening in yours. She took a shaky breath. I thought I was special because they told me I was. Because everyone kept saying I was going to be successful. And you were just the reliable one who'd always be there when needed. And I believed it. I believed I was better than you. That my dreams mattered more than your stability. That somehow my potential was worth more than your actual contribution. I let them treat you like background noise because it made me feel important. A long pause. I could hear her breathing, gathering herself for whatever came next. The store was failing for almost a year before it closed. Longer, maybe. I just couldn't admit it. Couldn't face the possibility that I wasn't the success story everyone expected. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, got one more loan, found one more investor, it would turn around. I kept asking Mom and Dad for more money. Money that I knew came from you. And I told myself it would be worth it in the end when I finally made it big. Another pause. Longer this time. When it collapsed. When I had to close the doors and admit that everything I'd built was worthless. I finally understood. I finally understood what it felt like to give everything you have, to sacrifice and struggle and pour yourself empty, and have nothing to show for it in the end. Nothing except regret and debt, and the knowledge that you wasted years chasing something that was never going to happen. Her voice got quieter, more intense. Except you did that for 8 years, and the thing you should have had to show for it, our family's love and respect and gratitude, we never even gave you that. You gave everything, and we gave you nothing back except criticism and comparison, and that night when Dad threw your money on the floor, I heard something that might have been a sob. I watched that happen. I wasn't there, but Mom told me about it later, and I thought you deserved it. For always being the responsible one. For making the rest of us look bad by comparison. I was glad they finally put you in your place. She was crying now. I could hear it clearly. And part of me wanted to feel something in response. Satisfaction or sympathy or anything. But I just felt empty. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about myself, about what matters in life. Working retail now, standing on my feet for 8 hours a day, folding clothes and smiling at customers. I think about you constantly. About all those years you supported the family while I chased my dreams. About how hard you must have worked, how much you must have sacrificed while I was posting pictures on social media and pretending to be a success. A long silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture her wherever she was, probably in that cramped apartment my aunt had described, sitting in the dark gathering courage for what came next. I'm not asking for money, she said finally. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for anything except for you to know that I see it now. All of it. Every comparison, every dismissal. Every time I watched Mom and Dad treat you like an afterthought and said nothing because it benefited me. I see it, and I'm sorry. And I know that doesn't fix anything or undo the damage or give you back the years you lost. But I needed you to know. I needed you to hear it from me. And Mom and Dad? They're working on it, in their own way. Dad especially. He's proud. You know how he is. Admitting he's wrong feels like dying to him. But he's different now. Quieter. Smaller somehow, like what happened knocked something loose inside him. My sister paused. I caught him looking at that old photo the other day. The one from my birthday party where you're in the background. He was just staring at it. And when I asked what he was doing, he said he was trying to remember the last time he told you he was proud of you. He couldn't remember. And then he started crying. I've never seen Dad cry before. Not once in my entire life. I thought about that photo. My sister in focus, center frame, bathed in light and attention. Me in the background, blurred and forgotten, holding a plate of cake nobody noticed me get. Maybe my father had finally noticed I was there. Maybe it had taken losing everything to see what had been right in front of him all along. I can't just forgive you, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Any of you. What happened, what was said, it wasn't one mistake on one bad night. It was years of choices that showed me exactly where I stood in this family. Years of being told in 1,000 small ways that I didn't matter. Hearing sorry, even sorry that sounds genuine, doesn't erase that. Doesn't undo the damage. I know, I'm not asking you to forgive us, not really. That's not my call to make. She sounded calmer now, like she'd said what she needed to say and could accept whatever came next. I'm just asking you to know that we're sorry, that we see what we did, that if there's ever, someday, maybe a possibility of, she trailed off, seeming to lose her nerve, unsure how to ask for something she knew she didn't deserve. I'll think about it, I heard myself say. The words surprised me as they came out, unplanned, emerging from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. I'm not promising anything. No money, no going back to how things were, no pretending the last 8 years didn't happen. But maybe, eventually, if things go well, we could have dinner or something. Talk. See if there's anything left worth saving. My sister let out a breath that was almost a sob, relief and disbelief mixed together. That's more than I deserve. More than any of us deserve. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I said I'd think about it. That's all I'm offering. I know. It's still more than we had any right to hope for. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one against the darkening sky. I thought about forgiveness and family and the strange mathematics of love and sacrifice. I thought about the person I'd been a year ago, so desperate for approval that I'd given away everything trying to earn it, so hungry for love that I'd accepted whatever scraps were thrown my way. And I thought about the person I was now, finally whole, finally free, finally valuing myself enough to demand that others value me too. I didn't know if I'd ever fully reconcile with my family. Maybe we'd have that dinner someday and discover there was nothing left to salvage, just strangers who shared DNA and memories and nothing else. Maybe time would heal enough wounds to rebuild something new, different from what we had before but real in its own way. Maybe they'd slip back into old patterns the moment I showed weakness, and I'd have to walk away again, this time permanently. But whatever happened next, whatever came of my sister's apology and my parents' regret, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again sacrifice my own well-being for people who couldn't see my worth. I would never again measure my value by someone else's approval. I would never again be the blurred figure in the background of my own life, out of focus and easily forgotten. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, they would eventually see me, eventually appreciate me, eventually love me back the way I needed to be loved. But that's not how it works. People don't suddenly value what they've always taken for granted. They don't suddenly see what's been invisible to them their whole lives. Sometimes you have to stop giving before anyone realizes what they were receiving. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't that my family didn't love me. Maybe they did, in their own limited way. The hardest lesson was that their love, such as it was, came with conditions I could never meet. I could have given them every penny I ever earned, every hour of every day, my entire life poured out at their feet, and it still wouldn't have been enough. Because what they wanted wasn't my sacrifice. What they wanted was for me to be someone else entirely. Someone more impressive, more ambitious, more like my sister. They couldn't love me for who I was, only resent me for who I wasn't. And once I understood that, really understood it in my bones, I was free. I was finally, after 32 years of waiting for someone else to see me, the main character of my own story. And whatever chapter came next, however the plot twisted and turned, I was going to write it on my own terms. Not for my parents' approval. Not for my sister's respect. Not for anyone but myself. The stars kept appearing, one by one, and I sat there watching them until the sky was full of light. Somewhere across town, my family was sleeping in their cramped apartment, dreaming whatever dreams people dream when they've lost everything, and only now begun to understand why. And here I was, in my comfortable home, surrounded by a life I'd built with the money I used to give away, finally at peace. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if I'd ever sit down for that dinner with them. Didn't know if forgiveness was even possible after everything that happened. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about it. Whatever came next, I would handle it, on my terms, in my time. With my own best interests finally. Finally at the front of the line. That's the thing about being invisible for 32 years. When you finally step into the light, when you finally let yourself be seen, everything looks different, brighter, more vivid, more real. And you realize that the light was always there, waiting. You just had to stop standing in someone else's shadow.